The Saturn V launch vehicle, this is the largest and most powerful rocket ever flown. It carried astronauts to the moon in July 1969. How did we get there? The new president, John F. Kennedy, proclaims early in his administration that the United States will get astronauts to the moon by the end of the decade. Now, you have to keep in mind at this time, this is the height of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Soviets had launched Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite, in October 1957. They were the first to put a human into orbit in 1961, and the United States was behind. This was a lofty goal to try to make America's stamp on the world. We were going to get humans to the moon. This posed a major technological challenge for the new space agency, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Now, at the time, the military departments, the Air Force, the Navy, and the Army had ballistic missiles, long-range ballistic missiles. NASA took advantage of ballistic missile technology for civilian spaceflight. So in 1961, NASA puts Alan Shepard on the top of an Army Redstone missile for America's first suborbital flight. Does the same thing with the Titan launch vehicle. To get humans to the moon, that's a big jump because you're going much further, and that requires a major leap forward in technology. That's how you get the Saturn V. The Saturn V at 363 feet is a three-stage rocket. It's going to be the most powerful one ever flown. How do you get there? Well, the key is scaling up that technology, but NASA had to consider a number of trade-offs. So they have to some extent, push the technological frontier to get there in terms of thrust and power of the engines, but they also have to weigh, at the same time, the safety of the crew. So there's safety and reliability and pushing the technological state of the art. And that's kind of there's a key tension there that has to be taken into account. So I mentioned earlier the Redstone ballistic missile that NASA used to send Alan Shepard into suborbital flight. You think about the thrust of that, 75,000 pounds of thrust in that engine. You go up to the Saturn V, the F1 engine, which powered the first stage of the Saturn V, 1.5 million pounds of thrust. That's a huge jump in thrust. How do you get there? So what NASA engineers have to do is they have to develop materials that are strong enough to withstand the enormous pressures and strains on the engine itself. A rocket engine is a controlled explosion, essentially. So the NASA engineers have to develop materials that are strong enough to do that. So it's a combination of science, it's a combination of some engineering, and of some craft knowledge. So those are some of the trade-offs that NASA engineers had to think about when they were developing the Saturn V. The rocket itself performed flawlessly in 1969, all the way up until 1972 with the last lunar mission. And something to keep in mind, I think, that is very important is that chemical propulsion of the type that was used in the Saturn V F1 engine and in all the liquid fuel rocket engines prior to that and all the liquid fuel rocket engines since then, that's the mainstay of our space launch vehicle capability in the United States. It hasn't changed, primarily because there's no alternative that has come along that's more efficient, more cost-effective, safer. So what NASA engineers are doing is they're trying to squeeze more efficiency out of a technology that has existed for decades.